in the
Hey everyone, welcome back to the It's a Mind Game podcast. My name is Jade, and today I have our fabulous guest, Jacqueline, back on, who is a psychotherapist who specializes in eating disorder recovery, body image, and I'm going to say a holistic approach to confidence and all that it entails. And I'm just so grateful to have you back on because we have the most in-depth and beautiful conversations. So welcome back.
It's always a highlight of my day to be here, Jade. Thank you so much for having me back.
Thank you. Now, this topic that we decided on today actually sort of poked its head up in our last conversation, and we've been sort of dying to talk about it ever since. And that is the wellness approach to getting out of crazy regimes and finding balance, and this idea of balance and having equal parts of self-care, equal parts of work, home life, social life, relationships, the pets, all of these different elements that combine beautifully to the word balance, though upon application it can be a little bit more difficult than what we think, and sometimes can set too high of a standard where we actually end up in a more rigid routine than ever before, or we don't pursue self-care ideals because the idea of finding time for balance seems way too aggressive. So I guess to start things off, how would you describe balance if we were trying to find that? And what does that mean for some clients that you work with?
No, very succinct illustration of what you've just walked through is so helpful, because it is balance in its, if I could say, healthiest form, is almost going to happen intuitively as a reflection of our values. But it's interesting is as you were just offering that explanation to our conversation today, the idea of wellness, which maybe initially was a bridge out of the more eating disorder diet culture phenomena that many of us were bombarded with, has over time in some pockets become its own culture of reductionistic, compulsive, perfectionistic ideals, so that we feel we have to tick these boxes of wellness instead of what might be more overtly eating disordered. And I think that is very transferable to the idea of balance. And if we could call the amplification or exaggeration of that toxic balance, then it just becomes another way to punish ourselves, to limit our intuition, to fill our days with ways of performing acceptance. And because we are able to post on Instagram a picture of sitting by the beach, we feel like, okay, I did that, I ticked that box, I got that in. It reminds me a little bit of, or a lot, of the idea of orthorexia, which many listeners might be aware is an illness which in itself means that such obsession with health and the implication of measures towards health becomes its own undoing, that it's such an obsessive prioritizing of health that health, quite literally, physically, very often, and certainly more broadly, holistically, in terms of across a life, is reduced. And I think balance is very representative of that we can be so obsessed or outside of ourselves in how we're trying to attain it that we don't have it at all.
Yeah, and as you beautifully said, it can almost sweep in as a healing modality from eating disorder behaviors or exercise addiction behaviors and things like that. And just like any of those experiences, it comes in with a good intention. It's like, well, maybe if I find balance, then I can care for myself better and I can implement better strategies and overall lead a healthier life than what I have been doing previously. And I actually brought up this conversation to a girlfriend before we jumped on the podcast, and she said, I'm not even sure what you mean by toxic balance. And I thought, well, that's probably a really good thing for us to pop into the conversation, because it can be that sneaky that you might actually be doing it and listening to this audio and going, oh, hang on, I think this balance thing has got me. So I personally think of toxic balance as that idea of, in order to be well-rounded and caring for myself, I must make sure that I get my yoga done, I do my journaling, I get to work 10 minutes early, I have my coffee half an hour before my lunch, or perhaps afternoon because I can't have it too early. And after work, I've got to sit down and meditate for 10 minutes, and then I'll call my girlfriend, have dinner with my partner, have a stretch, relax, watch a movie, go to bed. But in portions, if you were to ask someone what their day in a life feels like, you go, oh, that's great. Look at their morning ritual. Oh, that's lovely. They journal, they meditate, they do yoga, they go to the gym, they do all these lovely things. And in snippets, it looks great. It sounds great. You can easily wrap your head around, oh, they've got it worked out. They've got things sorted, that idea of resting and working. Though I guess if you're looking at that as a 24-hour window, 7 days a week, it's so many things to get done, and to have the pressure of executing all of those things every single day. And if we bring in the idea of being intuitive about what our body and mind needs, it's completely overruling it, because we're almost saying, no, but you have to do the yoga, and you have to do the journaling, and then you have to go to work, and you have to have the coffee, and then you have to relax from the coffee. And suddenly you can see the obsessive or the compulsive side of it, when I guess if you haven't shifted your vision, it's a blind spot. You don't really know that it's there. But I would love to hear your take on what you think toxic balance would be, if you share the same view, if you've got any other approaches or maybe scenarios you've heard. Let's just air out this whole idea, and perhaps what balance could mean from a more positive, lighter note if we were searching for it.
I think what you've walked through, I was just like nodding ferociously as you were talking, is like exactly. And I've experienced it myself. I've witnessed it for so many people I support and people in my life, that we, rather like orthorexia again, it's so, we're a conscientious lot, those of us that are predisposed to eating disorders, and we're trying to do the right thing, and we're trying to take on the feedback and improve quality of life. And sometimes it fits into that sort of good girl persona of this is sort of what the teacher or life has said we need to do, and so we're trying to do all those things. And sometimes it's for other reasons, but we're taking on this idea, and I think some of it comes from that concept that you can have it all, that women can have it all. And it's such an interesting thing to unpack, because from my perspective, what I have seen in this work and in life is that those, how many words are 5 words, have a lot to answer for, that they have set up this expectation that you should be fitting in all of the things to have a valid life. And it feeds into that idea of needing to validate the space you take up, and in different ways. It's just inserting, maybe swapping out different criteria. So maybe someone's working through recovery and they've reduced the total amount of time. For example, they might be exercising, but they've entered in journaling and entered in meditation instead of that. But if we engage with those experiences from a get it done, tick it off mentality, it's often not, we're not going to integrate it. It's not helpful. And I also hear that from clients, like, but I'm doing the self-care, I did my journaling, I've ticked off the meditating. And it's really a call to the quality of which we're engaging in anything, because the doing of it won't be the transforming factor. It'll be the experiencing of it and what we're meeting it with, which part of us we're actually amplifying when we engage in the activity. So I think that idea and almost the fetishization of work-life balance, that for those of us that are more perfectionistic, we herald as the new ideal and we go after that, and it becomes its own prison that might look healthier in what we've been influenced to see that as from the outside, but it's almost just as much pressure and just as much stress to keep it all going. And it can lead to more disillusionment, because then we wonder, why isn't life like I now have these things that I've traded out and put into my world, so why isn't life feeling better? Why are my stress levels still high?
Yeah, I particularly like how you said trading out just then, because that's I guess that's where it can be quite tricky in regards to the intention starts off well. As you explained, sometimes when we are trying to get out of exercise addictions or disordered eating behaviors, that swapping things to do can be really helpful in the early stages, because being alone with myself and giving myself permission to literally do nothing is way too extreme. But I can justify sitting down and writing a few pages in my journal. I can justify doing a half an hour yoga practice. So you can see how initially that's such a positive step forward. It's like, good job, you're taking a step back from something that's really aggressive, not serving you at this point in time, and you've subbed it in for something that's going to help restore and to heal and slow down. But then I guess that's where the exploration of things doesn't end, though, because it's almost like a crutch at the start. And I guess I think of it as almost the next step from that is then being in the position to make the choice in the moment on whether it's a good time to journal versus I have to journal in order to fall asleep at night before I get ready to go to work. Because initially that constant behavior helps reduce other unhelpful ones, but also you don't want that to morph into the new behavior where perhaps you don't want to stay out for dinner the extra half an hour because you really need to go home and journal and get everything out of your head before you go to bed. And like, it's such an innocent thing, but suddenly it's got the capacity to take away from social elements again, or from relaxing and being present, because you've got that, no, but I know that's what I do before bed. And the trickiness or that stickiness sort of sneaks in again, where I guess you would call it that toxic balance, because you're trying to get everything done perfectly. That now in that social scenario, you're being withdrawn from a fun social event over the idea of, but I have to get that self-work done, otherwise I can't rest. And now I also can't enjoy myself if I stay out because I know what I need to do.
Exactly. Yeah. It's what really struck me as you were walking through that, and I'm so glad that you punctuated how important it is in recovery to stagger phases of this, because you're so right that the going from, say, having more exercise taking up time in the day, or just being in some form of anxiety, it probably is a lot more helpful to even have structure around the idea of balance and things that would create more balance. It's just knowing there could be something beyond that as well. And with the, I think part of what's happened is that we have so quickly in our society become inundated with more visuals as to what things look like than we ever have before in human history. So we start to, it's part of what's happened with health, that we think about health and we see it as the marketing, the advertising, the influencers, the concept and construction of that discourse, rather than maybe 50 years ago, if someone was asked about health, they'd be more inclined to talk about a feeling because that was their reference point. Health is feeling X, Y, and Z. Similarly with balance, if we think about what is balance, if we stop to define that for a moment, it is in its essence and the meaning of the word, it's steadiness. It's being able to stay in, able to find your footing and stay in a safe position in different situations and different environments. But if we were to ask people similarly to what that looks like to them, I would guess that there would be a lot of responses about the imagery of that. It means not working too much and fitting in social time and getting enough sleep and having movement in your world and having enough time to have X, Y, and Z practices. But to do that all at once, there just aren't enough hours in the day if we add it all up. And if we take on all the suggestions as to how long we could be meditating and journaling and working, and if we're perfectionistic to be influenced in different siphons of life as well, that we also want to do well at work, and we also want to make sure our friends feel really cared for and attended to, it becomes an unsustainable venture.
Yeah, and I guess it facilitates that perfect sort of 24-hour time frame as well, because we're so loving that rigidity of like getting everything done. And then again, it's just that control element. I can predict everything. I've got all my bases covered. Everything's going to be okay. And as you said there, like the idea of making sure your friends and family are well supported and that you're progressing in your career if that's a focus for you, and that you're still including movement because you want to care for your body, and you're still including rest because that's really important too. And suddenly, if you look at all of them at the same time, as you said, how do we do it all at once? And I think that's sort of where we struck in our last podcast, where it's not so much the idea of this perfect balance that we want, but the idea of harmony. And very at the start of this podcast, you mentioned drawing from our values rather than drawing from like a perfect schedule. And I think that's such a beautiful way to sort of articulate, if you were to say that there was a goal or something that you wanted to aim towards, it would be more making decisions based on your value system rather than based on tick boxes or schedules. And I guess a good example of that would be, sometimes you do have friends that are really in need of support. All right. So if that scenario presents itself, perhaps you're not going to yoga that day, perhaps you're not going for a walk or a coffee date with somebody else because that friend really, really needs you. So in that, let's say 24-hour window, you've had all of these things come to you on the day, and you go, well, it's really important to me to be a good friend. It's really important to me to finish at 5 o'clock like I'm meant to. Yoga is important to me, but out of the three things that are happening right now, these two are most. And there's so much empowerment in being able to identify the things that are important to you, but then give them hierarchy, because I think that's another thing that's been diluted down. And I love the visuals, like we're seeing more now than ever before, because I sort of know it, but I never thought of it the way you explained it. And it's like, it's so true. We've got this expectation of everything intensified at once because that's what we're seeing all the time. But the reality is, if you can hold true to your specific, unique values and be very aware of what's happening in your world right now, then you're in the best position to live a life of harmony, because you can easily go, based on what's presenting itself to me right now and what's most important, this choice actually seems quite obvious because of what I hold true to myself, versus this idea of balance where, well, I need to finish at 5 o'clock. Like I said, I still need to keep that coffee date. I still need to make sure I squeeze in yoga, and I need to attend to this friend. You can technically do all of them. If you stay up a little bit later, you allocate 30 minutes to eat, like logically you can get there. Though at the end of the night, are you going to be proud of yourself for caring for the friend who really needed you in the capacity that you did in that 30-minute block? Or if you were to go the harmony route and do an audit on everything and go, okay, well, this is what's happening. This person's having a really hard time. It's important to me that I'm there for them. I'm going to call up the other friend, apologize for the late change. I'm going to call up the yoga studio. Sorry, I can't make it today. You've diverted a few things. Everyone's all right. You've put your focus on what's most important. You go to bed at night going, I made a good choice. I'm happy I was there. It doesn't feel like you're at a loss because you cancelled one coffee date and cancelled one yoga, because you stayed true to what was important to you at the time that those things presented themselves. I'm hoping that was a good example.
And that's brilliant, Jade. I think that to me is so relatable, and listeners will really connect with those examples. Even the exercise of at the end of the day or at night, when we often find ourselves thinking about, I didn't get that done, I didn't fit that in. Maybe instead inviting your thoughts into reflecting on whether you executed your values that day, and was I kind? Did I put my attention towards what I value? I spent time engaging in meaningful connection over rushing through something so I could fit something else in. And that to me is part of life artistry, that you can have it all has also developed the tagline or the modification. Maybe you can't have it all at once, but you can have it all over a lifetime. We can have it all over a greater period of time, but I don't even know if that is true. I think life and our time is so finite. It is so precious, and it's part of what makes it really beautiful, that we have this fleeting opportunity to contribute in the way that matters the most, and feel how we engage with life in the way that we decide to curate, and to the extent that we have influence over it, and a lot of it we just don't. That if we get clear on our values, and I often talk about a North Star, which is your fundamental value, the value that is stronger over all of others, and that might change, you can reassess that, but it's a good shorthand way of referring to whether you've lived a day or your week or your month in a way that will sit well with you, and that if we get less time here than we're hoping to, or even if we get a long life, it's still and there's so much we can do with that we are settled and enthused and find meaning and fulfillment in what we chose, how we chose to spend that data. I think that is something that is really important. And this idea of seasons of life, that we go through stages that are particularly busy, or one component of our life might call us in more. For example, if you start a new relationship, often you might witness that for a friend, they kind of go into vortex a little bit, and that's really healthy and natural as they bond and develop and connect with their new partner. And then they might rebalance that in time, or if someone has young children, they might need to go into the vortex of that, and that needs so much more of their attention and time and energy, that the other components of balance cannot be facilitated without it actually being damaging and unhelpful to that mum's mental health, rather than, we think it's supportive to say to a new mum, make sure you're still spending time with friends, and make sure you're still getting you time. Sometimes it's more liberating and refreshing to say, you know what, you're probably not going to get you time for a while, and that's exactly how it might need to be, and that season will play out again, but you have permission to just give this your all for this season. And if you can also know that you're executing your values in that context, and there will be others, that we do have that seasonal balancing out of different modes, unless we're getting stuck in something like toxic productivity. But outside of that, there will be time where we have more time with family, time where we have more time for career, etc. But also being really clear about what matters most within those opportunities will give us more satisfaction.
It was so interesting as you explained that, and I loved how you explained it almost like a vortex, because it can be easy to sort of think in the moment that we need to give our everything to everyone, otherwise they might not like us anymore, they might get upset, or they might get angry. Though, as you were explaining, like the vortex of a new relationship or a new mum, or perhaps even something grief related, like a death in the family, or the loss of a job, or there's so many things that can sort of come to mind. And I think maybe just the visualization of the vortex, when you take yourself outside of worrying about what other people are going to perceive, if you commit to your vortex, let's say, and step out of it to witness the vortex of those around you, it's actually such a known thing that that's what humans do. Like, as you're explaining that, I was just had like friends scenarios of, I remember when so-and-so got their girlfriend or boyfriend. I remember when I first met my husband, when I first had Casima, or when I first started recovering from HA. That's what it felt like, just these little vortexes. And then I'm thinking of people closest to me that have gone through all kinds of experiences, and I've watched them go into their vortex, and sort of the best way to care sometimes is to observe and let the person do what they need to, and they'll come back when they're ready. But I guess just having that knowing that even if you feel like you can't retreat into your vortex, that it's actually very human, and most people are very conscious and aware that that's a natural process, and they're not going to demonize it. It's more of a, oh, they're in their love bubble, or, they're processing, or they're focused, or, and I just, thank you for articulating it the way that you did, because I'm hoping the listeners sort of got that impression the way I did. Sort of, I've consciously or subconsciously always known that that's what humans do to enjoy and to cope and to sort of get through life. Though I do wonder, for anyone listening who might not be as aware about the idea of having a value system, because they've been more like success driven, goal driven, task driven, very like one lane, same pace. If you were to start bringing in this idea of values and going, well, I'm not sure what I value, perhaps what are some questions they could ask themselves or journal about, or anything to really think on to just start that process? Because as you said, they can change over time. But if that's new to you, what's a good place to start?
Such a great question, Jade. I think one way I like to work it out with people, because I also think if we go too abstract, we tend to assume our values because we hear other people talk about them, or society suggests what our values should be. So something like kindness I mentioned earlier, and I know that to be one of mine. But people, it could almost be like, yeah, of course being kind is important, so I guess that's one of mine. So one thing I like to do is ask people to come up with their top 5, and I'll speak to how to do that in a moment, and then their top 3, and then their top 1, and that top 1 would be the North Star that I mentioned. Questions to figure out how to do that. I like hypotheticals, and maybe I could write some out, and we could even put it out for listeners on our platforms. But if you were to look at like what you illustrated earlier, where you were going to fit in a yoga, but you were committed to work and a friend really needed you, how did you make that decision? Just prioritize the friend and then work? Whether that was conscious or subconscious, you filtered it through a value system and intuitively knew, I couldn't turn my back on my friend. Like, of course, that's a high priority, and then I need to complete work. And you knew, you just had a knowing that the other things would be okay to wait. So playing that out in various scenarios where, what if it was family versus friendship? What if it was work versus family? What if it was health versus work? And that can be a way to sort of distill down what most resonates with you. And for most of us, our values were developed by about the age of 7, our core values, and we might rebrand them as such or newly understand them, but they'll often be quite consistent. So another way you can look at it is to look back at yourself as a child and see what you valued, what you prioritized. For example, maybe being really creative or having fun might have been things that played out even around that age that you can still see in yourself, even if you express it differently now. And even if you've told yourself or been told it's no longer appropriate, there's often still a holding on to the essentiality of those ingredients in making our life the most worthwhile.
The core values by the age of 7 is so interesting, because it's a part of me wants to say we don't know much at the age of 7, but to a degree we know so much more because we haven't had the outsider influence of everything. Like, it's so pure. And then to think that you've got that sorted out at 7, and then you go through primary school, high school, and all these variables get thrown in, that no wonder throughout adulthood we can sort of lose track of what we do value, because we just get so much thrown at us. But I would love to get some questions or suggestions from you that we could perhaps link in and share that with those listening. So I think that'd be a really powerful practice. Or, as you said, in the meantime, think back to when you were a child and what things I guess set you alight, like what inspired you and had you sort of thriving or glowing, I'm going to say, because I think about, even as you said that, for me, I've always been a nurturer. Like, I always wanted to look after those who, whether they needed my help or not, I'm just here for you. And that's something that's been consistent throughout my life. And I'm sure those listening, like, at least one thing's popped up when you think about what you were like as a child. So even I'd love to hear feedback from anyone listening. Now, Jacqueline, our time together comes to an end so quickly, though I'm really glad with what we've covered today, and I hope it's got our listeners sort of thinking and a bit more curious about what balance means to them, what harmony means to them, and perhaps exploring what their values are. And if they know what their values are, perhaps even just the reassessment of, are they the same as what they were when you last evaluated them? Because everything changes so much and so quickly. But I believe, like how you addressed it as the North Star, when everything gets really messy, sometimes knowing what your values can really help make things easier to decide on. Because it's like, at my core, I function better when I focus on this, or I prioritize this. And it just helps all the other things kind of shimmy away. But with that in mind, thank you so much for joining us today. I absolutely love every single minute of every conversation that we have.
Thank you, Jade. It's such a pleasure to be here again.
Oh, what a wonderful episode with Jacqueline. I hope you loved it as much as I did. I'm going to leave her details in the show notes if you'd like to connect with her, or if you'd like to reach out and have a chat with me. If you'd like to support the podcast, that would be amazing. You can either share an episode on Instagram or Facebook, or if you tag us as well, so that we can create some more awareness around HA and mindset and women's health. In the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time.